Hey guys, tonight we're slipping off the beaten path of neon Tokyo and into the flickering lantern light of Edo period Japan. Picture this. You're stepping into a narrow alleyway paved with smooth stones, where the air smells faintly of pine smoke and something sweet, maybe roasted chestnuts or grilled mochi. You can hear your own footsteps and the rustle of silk as someone brushes past you, too fast to see clearly. The air is thick with mist, maybe from a nearby bathhouse, maybe from the secrets clinging to these streets. You're headed to a tea house, but not the kind that's open at noon and full of matcha latte tourists. No, this one doesn't even have a sign. There's just a Norman curtain, swaying ever so slightly in the night breeze. And behind that fabric lies a world so full of coded rules, whispered power, and elegant deceit. You probably won't survive this without tripping over a futon or offending someone very important. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and your local time in the comments. I want to know who else is walking these shadowed streets with us tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pause just outside the tea house entrance, your feet slightly damp from the cobbled street. A paper lantern overhead casts a warm glow, enough to reveal that the Norn bears a tiny ink stamp in the corner, more family crest than logo, and barely visible unless you're looking. That's the point. This isn't a place for everyone. It's for those who know, or those who think they do. The street behind you quiets. Somewhere in the distance, a shamisen plucks a lazy tune. You take a breath. The curtain lifts. Inside, everything changes. Your world narrows. Smaller, quieter, yet somehow infinitely more detailed. You're greeted not with words, but with a graceful bow from a woman kneeling near the entrance. Her kimono is laid and heavy, embroidered with cranes that seem ready to take flight. You return the bow, or at least you try. Your knees crack a little. This is Yoshiwara, the floating world, and this tea house, nestled like a hidden blossom in its labyrinth, isn't a place where you just sip tea. It's where reputations rise, where silence costs extra, and where the rules are thicker than the futons in winter. Historians still argue whether these tea houses evolved from humble rest stops or from exclusive geisha training quarters. Either way, by the mid-Edo period, they had morphed into complex social salons where every glance meant something, and every pause in conversation might be more loaded than the tea tray. You're shown into a small room with tatami mats so soft you wonder if you're walking on woven clouds. There's no furniture, just a low table and a brazier flickering in the center, warming the air. A bowl of seasonal sweets, sweet potato slices glazed in syrup, rests on a tray that's surely worth more than your monthly rent back home. Across from you, another guest adjusts their sleeve. You catch a flash of a crest, maybe samurai, maybe a rich merchant. The line's blurry now. Everyone here wears masks more subtle than makeup. The tea is served by an attendant who seems to glide rather than walk. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. Every movement, from the way she folds the cloth to how she angles the cup, follows a choreography older than most buildings in Tokyo today. It's peaceful. It's intimidating. You really hope you're holding the cup the right way. A mainstream historical fact. During the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, tea houses and licensed pleasure quarters like Yoshiwara were often gateways to interactions with high-ranking courtesans or geisha, though the actual tea was usually incidental. These were status venues, not Starbucks. But here's your quirky tidbit. Some tea houses were staffed by conversation girls, women trained not in dance or music, but in the art of witty banter and elaborate puns. They were human crossword puzzles with killer cheekbones. The tea house's lighting is low, all from candles placed behind rice paper screens, casting soft shadows on the wall. You notice a niche, a tokonoma, holding a scroll with calligraphy you can't read but feels important. There's also a single branch of cherry blossom, perfectly placed, even though it's not cherry blossom season. That's how far ahead they plan here. You hear laughter, low, musical, from another room. The walls are thin, but not for hearing. They are thin for feeling. You're supposed to know someone else is there, without ever acknowledging them. It keeps everyone guessing. It keeps the illusion alive. There's a whisper behind the screen. Maybe about you. Maybe not. In the floating world, the only thing real is what you believe long enough to enjoy it. Everything else, names, promises, love, is decorative. It's not long before you're gently guided out, not rushed, but smoothly transitioned, as though the evening were a dream being folded back into itself. You don't recall standing. You just drift. Outside again, the air feels sharper. The tea house behind you is silent. You're not sure what you learned, but something shifted. Maybe your posture, maybe your idea of power. You move on, deeper into Yashura. One tea house down, a dozen more to explore, each a different shade of quiet deception. And you're just getting started. You walk farther down the misty street, passing shadowed storefronts and shuttered stalls. A light rain has begun to fall. Not enough to drench, just enough to carry the scent of fresh earth and wood smoke through the air. You spot another tea house tucked discreetly behind a bamboo screen, its paper windows aglow. But again, no sign. No hours. No menu. This isn't the kind of place you wander into hoping for a quick refreshment. In Edo period Japan, tea house rarely meant tea. Or at least, not only tea. The name was a veil, a gentle euphemism that preserved decorum even as the activities within danced along the edge of propriety. Tea houses, called chaya, were actually multifaceted hubs of social interaction. Think high-end lounges, mixed with a matchmaking service, garnished with a dose of political theater, and occasionally seasoned with scandal. A respectable merchant might bring a client here to subtly secure a deal. A feudal lord might arrive incognito to discuss alliances. And yes, sometimes a visit meant a delicate introduction to a geisha or courtesan, though never directly. Everything in Edo was done in layers, like lacquer on a box. Mainstream historians agree that tea houses were instrumental to the cultural rhythm of the ukiyo, the floating world. They provided a liminal space between duty and indulgence. 1 foot in reality, 1 foot lost in the steam rising from a bowl of ceremonial matcha. You step through another Norn curtain. This time, the interior opens into a slightly larger room, with a view of a tiny moss garden through a bamboo trellis. The floor creaks softly beneath your feet, a reminder that the building breathes with you. A woman kneels at a corner desk, her brush moving in smooth, practiced strokes across a scroll. She doesn't look up, but you know she's clocked you. She is the Okami, the tea house's mistress, and nothing escapes her. You lower yourself to the mat. It's not easy. Your knees protest, and your feet have gone a bit numb from the walk. But the moment you're down, the world quiets again. The Okami finally raises her eyes. They are kind, but shrewd. She wears a faded kimono patterned with waves, her gray hair tied neatly. Her voice, when she speaks, is soft but undeniable. You are expected. A polite lie, but one you're relieved to accept. Most tea houses weren't public hangouts. You didn't just walk in off the street. Access depended on prior introduction or invitation. These were relationship networks disguised as buildings. And getting in was half the game. The tea arrives. It's not even the highlight, but it's exquisite. Frothy, bitter, thick enough to hold warmth even as the wind picks up outside. The cups are handcrafted, each a tiny museum piece. You wonder how many lips have touched them before yours, or how many of those lips belong to people now in history books. A quirky tidbit for you. Some of the more exclusive Edo tea houses would assess guests not just by their family name, but by how they entered the room. If your bow was too shallow, or your kimono tie too loose, you'd be quietly uninvited from future visits. Wise still, your name might disappear from future conversation entirely. And in a world built on names, that was social exile. The other guests here speak quietly. One's humming a folk tune, another is sketching on washi paper. You hear debate near the hearth, something about kabuki actors and whether one truly retired or just went into hiding. The opinions are firm. No one raises their voice. Historians still argue whether tea houses were more influential in political matchmaking or in shaping artistic trends. Some say they were salons where poets, painters, and playwrights polished their reputations. Others insist that behind every major alliance in late Edo, There was a tea house and a few strategically spilled cups of tea. You sip slowly, your hands warming around the bowl. The rain is heavier now. A small leak drips rhythmically into a stone basin outside, keeping time with the quiet heartbeat of the night. There's something comforting in the rhythm. The Okami returns, not with more tea, but with a look. It's not unkind, but definitive. You nod. Your time here is done. Others are waiting. And besides, the story continues elsewhere. Back outside, the rain has slowed again, turning the streets to slick rivers of reflected light. You pause beneath a paper lantern, watching the kanji characters sway gently. You're starting to understand. A tea house isn't about what's served. It's about who's seen, what's said, and what's never spoken at all. It's a performance. And tonight, you were just lucky enough to be cast in the background. Your next destination looms in the mist. The curtain sways. You move forward. This time, you're led through a back alley, one of those narrow veins of a city that barely fits two people shoulder to shoulder. The buildings seem to lean in as you pass, as if listening. A single lantern flickers to life just as you reach the door. Another tea house. But something's different. This one feels quieter, tighter, run not by mystery, but by order. You step inside. The scent here is sharper, sandalwood, charcoal, and the faintest hint of plum. And the woman waiting for you is not here to entertain. She's here to manage. She is the Okami of this house as well. But unlike the last, her expression carries the gravity of someone who knows 15 secrets before breakfast. Her kimono is immaculate, pinned high at the collar, with sleeves barely brushing the floor. Her posture is steel wrapped in silk. She doesn't speak much. She doesn't need to. Her presence fills the room. She offers a gesture, and attendants appear almost magically. Silent girls in subdued colors, their faces serene, their movements impossibly precise. You're seated again, but this time there's a different energy. The walls here are thicker, the cushions firmer, the silence heavier. You realize this is a more structured establishment, one favored by the elite. Mainstream fact, in Edo period Yashura, the Okami was the power behind the scenes. While courtesans and geisha dazzled guests, it was the Okami who curated the atmosphere, selected the clientele, and maintained strict discipline over staff and visitors alike. Some wielded more influence than the samurai who visited them. A quirky tidbit, Okami often memorized hundreds of regular clients' preferences, right down to how hot they liked their steak or whether they favored pine-scented incense over lotus. Memory wasn't just talent. It was currency. The girl who brings your tea tonight is impossibly young. Her hands tremble slightly as she places the tray in front of you. The Okami notices. There's a tiny frown. You feel it in your bones. This girl's next week just got busier. Historians still argue whether the strict hierarchy within tea houses empowered or oppressed the women inside. Some say it gave them structured paths to upward mobility. Others claim it was just a gilded cage, beautiful, intricate, and inescapable. As you sip your tea, you see a small bell on the floor near the door, a discreet signaling system. Guests could summon, request, or exit, all without speaking. Everything here is intentional. Nothing is spontaneous. Even the garden, visible through a slit in the wall, has been designed with asymmetry in mind. A stone lantern leans ever so slightly to the left. A single pine branch juts awkwardly across the path. It's all part of wabi-sabi, the aesthetic of imperfection. Except, of course, every imperfection is perfectly placed. The girl with the trembling hands returns. She's steadier now. She offers a plate of sweets and bows deeply. You see the Okami nod in approval. Redemption, or at least reprieve. You're oddly relieved. As you leave this house, the door slides shut behind you like a chapter ending. No words, no farewell, just the sense that you've witnessed something far more organized than it seemed. Out in the street again, you catch your reflection in a puddle, your posture straighter, your pace slower. The floating world is shaping you, and you're letting it. Your path tonight winds deeper into the old city's heart, past glowing lanterns and down a crooked lane littered with fallen camellia petals. There, half hidden behind ivy and darkness, waits another tea house, one of the more elusive kind. This isn't a place for tea. It's a place for permission. You hesitate outside the curtain. There's no music, no scent, no sound. Then the door slides open just wide enough for a paper fan to extend outward. No words, just the gesture. You're invited. Inside, there's no tea waiting. No attendants bowing. Instead, you're seated on a cushion beside a small writing desk. A scroll, already unfurled, lies open with an inkwell nearby. The invitation process begins. You learn quickly that in these more formal houses, everything begins with paper. Elegant invitations were sent to carefully selected clients, sometimes written in poetic riddles, sometimes sealed with a specific fragrance. The scent alone could identify the sender to those in the know. Mainstream fact: in high-ranking tea houses, spontaneous visits were almost unheard of. Protocol demanded a prior exchange of correspondence. The more elaborate the invitation, the more important the guest. A quirky tidbit: some invitations were so masterfully crafted, folded into origami cranes or scented with powdered pearl, that collectors still pay fortunes for them today. Your host arrives, not with a greeting, but with a poem. She recites it softly, the words flowing like water over stones. You're not expected to understand every word, just the tone. If the mood is right, the evening continues. Historians still argue whether these invitation rituals were barriers to entry or simply part of the performance. Did they elevate the experience or just keep the unworthy out? You respond to the poem with a hesitant haiku of your own. Not perfect, but earnest. She smiles faintly. The door slides open again. You've passed, and the real night begins. You are now, and not just into the building, but into the moment. A hush falls over your mind as the door closes behind you with the softest shft, like a breath being held. You're led by lantern light down a narrow hallway, each footfall muffled by layers of woven straw. The tea house breathes. Not metaphorically, it really feels alive. Every creak of floorboard, every subtle fragrance of plum blossom and charcoal, every shadow fluttering across a paper screen, it's all deliberate. You enter a small room, no larger than a garden shed back home, but somehow it feels expansive. A single tatami mat in the center, a carefully positioned kettle on the row, and there, sitting in perfect stillness like a sculpture of serenity, is your team master. She's older, with silver hair swept back into a knot that hasn't moved in decades. Her robe is simple but clean, gray on gray, like morning mist on stone. She greets you with a bow so deep you feel the gravity pull at your own spine. And then she begins. This is no Starbucks run. This is the Chinoyu, the Japanese tea ceremony, performed as both spiritual practice and subtle performance art. You're not allowed to talk. Not really. You're just expected to absorb. You've entered the calmest hostage situation in history. The tea master begins by folding a square of silk, fukusa, in slow, hypnotic movements. You can't look away. Her hands glide like water over the utensils. The bamboo scoop, the lacquered tea caddy, the whisk made from a single carved stalk. Everything has a place. Everything is treated with reverence. Even the steam curling from the kettle feels choreographed. Mainstream fact: the tea ceremony was central to Edo period culture, especially among the elite. Samurai, poets, monks, and courtesans all practiced it, and it was considered a way to discipline the mind, cleanse the spirit, and demonstrate refinement. And yet, this spiritual ballet served another purpose in the tea house world. It was also sales. The more graceful your host, the more valuable the house seemed. A perfect ceremony created an aura of transcendence, which made any associated services, conversation, companionship, even discreet negotiations, feel elevated. It was psychological alchemy. A quirky tidbit: some tea masters trained for decades just to be allowed to make tea publicly once a year. That's right, one performance, 12 months of prep. If you thought your job had pressure, your tea is finally presented. Not handed, offered. A bowl, wide and heavy, turned just so. You accept with both hands. You bow. You rotate the bowl slightly to avoid sipping from the front, an etiquette rule that somehow still feels intimate. The tea itself is bitter, thick, frothy. It tastes like the color green was punched into a cloud. Not unpleasant, just serious. You drink slowly. The warmth spreads through your chest. Not just heat, but a kind of focused quiet. Like your nervous system just exhaled. Historians still argue whether the tea ceremony in tea houses was truly spiritual or just performative grace layered over commercial intent. Was it meditation or manipulation? The ceremony ends not with a word, but a nod. The tools are cleaned again, every motion reversed, like the unraveling of a dream. You realize the ritual wasn't just about tea. It was about time, making you feel every passing second, making you stay present in a world built on illusion. You rise. The room feels brighter now, though no light has changed. You bow again to the tea master. She does not smile, but her eyes crinkle ever so slightly. Back in the hallway, the world resumes its quiet shuffle. Another guest waits, shoes removed, spine straight. She nods at you as you pass, like two monks trading seats at a temple. Outside, the rain has stopped. The night air carries the scent of tea, iron, and pine. You walk slowly now, not just because of the slippery stones, but because your pace has matched the rhythm of the ceremony. And in the echo of that quiet room, you realize sometimes the best deception is the one that brings peace. Your journey tonight takes a more architectural turn. As you follow a curved stone path to your next tea house, you start to notice details you'd missed before. The texture of the roof tiles, the way the bamboo fencing is tied with twine rather than nailed, the slight upward curl of the eaves, like a smile held just a bit too long. You're learning to see the language of space. This tea house appears humble at first glance. Low-roofed, weathered wood, a quiet entrance half hidden behind a manicured hedge. But the moment you enter, that illusion shatters. The interior is a labyrinth, not one of confusion, but of intention. Every angle, every wall, every step has been designed to seduce the senses and disarm your assumptions. Soundproof walls woven from layers of bamboo and mud. Tatami mats placed asymmetrically to break the rhythm of your steps. Tiny corridors that force you to stoop or slow down, nudging your body into humility before you even sit. Mainstream fact, Edo period tea houses often borrowed from tsukizakuri, the architectural style associated with the tea ceremony. These spaces were meant to evoke rustic elegance, simple, natural, but subtly luxurious in their craftsmanship. But in places like Yoshiwara, that aesthetic was turned up to 11. Tea houses became stage sets, designed to manipulate atmosphere and emotion. Not just what you saw, but how you saw it. You're guided into a chamber that appears square until you sit, only to realize one corner has been cut on purpose. It throws your perception off just enough to feel dreamlike. The ceiling above is low, but the alcove to your left opens vertically, drawing the eye upward toward a hanging scroll of a dragon in fog. You swear its eyes move when you're not looking. A quirky detail. Some high-end tea houses built false paths through their gardens, trails that led nowhere, or back to the start, just to delay impatient guests and make them reflect. Or confuse them. Or both. Your host appears. She doesn't say a word, but places a lamp near the floor, shifting the light in the room dramatically. Shadows now pull in corners that felt safe before. Your sense of space bends. This manipulation of environment was part of the performance. The tea was just a script. This was the stage. And it made everything said, or unsaid, feel deeper. Historians still argue whether these architectural tricks were spiritual aids intended to help guests reflect inward, or whether they were tools of subtle psychological control. Were guests enlightened or enchanted? As the evening continues, you notice a pattern. Every room you've entered has led you somewhere else. Tea houses were never static places. Rooms were often rearranged. Screens slid to create new boundaries. Some walls even rotated, revealing hidden chambers or private exits. Like a dream that edits itself as you walk through it. Tonight, you pass through a room that contains nothing but a single ink painting, hung on a wall so textured it could be mistaken for raw stone. The silence here is profound. You pause, just to listen to it. Then, back into the hallway, past a fountain made to drip at irregular intervals, a subtle soundscape designed to keep you from losing yourself completely. By the time you leave, you no longer trust your sense of direction. The entrance seems to be behind you, or above you. You're not sure. All you know is that you've been somewhere important, and that the walls remember. It's your first real misstep of the night. You arrive at a particularly refined tea house, circular gate, gravel meticulously raked, every lantern glowing with eerie precision, and you realize, too late, that you've worn the wrong kimono. Or more precisely, you haven't worn one at all. The doorman eyes your garments with the gentlest of winces, not enough to shame you, just enough to remind you. In the floating world, fashion is law. Inside, the guests are dazzling. Robes layered like the petals of a chrysanthemum. Obi sashes tied with knots more complex than family trees. Hair adorned with combs that double as weapons, or maybe antennae for gossip. Mainstream fact, in Edo-era tea houses, clothing wasn't just decorative. It was a communication tool. Color, fabric, pattern, even sleeve length all told a story of class, status, availability, and intent. You spot a man whose robe bays waves cresting into dragons. He's likely a retired samurai, wealthy, but seeking anonymity. Across the room, a woman's hair is pinned with a kanzashi shaped like a plum branch. That's seasonal and deliberate. She's signaling something. Maybe subtle flotation. Maybe mourning. Hard to tell. That's the fun. A quirky tidbit. Some courtesans would wear layered kimonos so heavy, up to 30 pounds, that they needed assistance just to rise from kneeling. It was less fashion, more performance art. Tonight, a geisha enters with such poise that even the laughter stops. Her robe is embroidered with cranes in mid-flight. Her makeup, pale with a hint of red on the lower lip only, is designed to exaggerate silence. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. Historians still argue whether the elaborate dress codes of these spaces were empowering forms of self-expression or just burdensome displays for male consumption. But tonight, you realize it doesn't matter much. In Hey, everyone is performing for each other. You try to sit straighter, adjust your sleeves, tuck your feet more gracefully, and then, quietly, you promise yourself you'll be better dressed next time. You step into a tea house that hums, softly, like the low resonance of a drum you don't realize you're hearing until your chest vibrates. The sound isn't music, exactly. It's conversation, laughter, the rustle of silk and the tinkling of glass-shaped cups. The night has grown older, and the tea houses now glow warmer. Looser, bolder, you're guided into a corner room, where a low brazier has already been lit. It casts a flickering amber across the walls, which are decorated with painted fans and faded calligraphy. You sit on a red cushion, soft and worn, and the attendant kneels beside you. She pours sake with quiet ceremony, then vanishes into the shadows. This is where stories live. Not the ones written on scrolls or carved into woodblocks, but the kind told in whispers, scandals, romantic entanglements, fleeting poetry scribbled on rice paper and lost before dawn. The air here smells like burnt sugar and ink. You feel like you're sitting inside a story someone forgot to write down. Mainstream fact, tea houses in Edo were places of news exchange. In the absence of mass media, they were unofficial hubs of gossip, trade secrets, and rumor, especially about political figures, performers, or business rivals. Across the room, someone's retelling the tale of an actor who disappeared mid-performance and was never seen again. Some say he ran off with a courtesan. Others whisper he angered a powerful daimyo. It's retold with theatrical flair, hands gesturing in sync with the shadows on the wall. Is it true? Probably not. But it's true enough for tonight. A quirky detail. Pillow books, diaries filled with scandal, dreams, and overheard conversations, was sometimes exchanged discreetly in tea houses. Some became serialized, smuggled out and printed as anonymous true tales for the reading public. You're handed a scroll, folded into thirds and tied with a silk ribbon. You're not supposed to open it here, but of course, you do. Inside is a haiku, possibly written by the geisha who served you earlier. Winter teacup spins. Your shadow forgets your name, before your lips do. Historians still argue whether these tea houses preserved oral history or merely muddled it with embellishment and ego. But when every tale is told like a secret and shared like a sin, does it even matter? You leave the tea house grinning slightly, sake buzzing in your veins. The night is full of stories now. Some yours, some borrowed, some made up on the spot, and all of them waiting to be retold. You wake up? No, not from sleep, but from that dreamlike haze that only tea houses seem to pull over your eyes. You're back outside, the stone path glistening from a recent rain. The lanterns have burned lower, their light softer, fuzzier around the edges. This next tea house feels cautious, almost nervous. Its curtain doesn't sway as you approach, and when it finally parts, the attendant who greets you seems unsure whether to bow or block your path. This is the push and pull between pleasure and control, between what the government said couldn't happen and what absolutely did. Inside, the room is stark. Clean lines, minimal decoration, no perfume in the air. You're served barley tea instead of sake. Your attendant wears muted brown, not the vibrant blue or gold of other houses. Mainstream fact, the Tokugawa shogunate enforced strict moral codes, especially in the 18th century. Brothels, tea houses, and entertainment districts were tolerated under the law but heavily monitored. There were curfews, dress restrictions, and even surprise raids. This tea house has adjusted to survive. There are no loud laughs here. Conversations are whispered. Every guest seems to sit with their back to the window, just in case. The Okami watches the street more than the guests. A quirky tidbit, one Yoshiwara tea house built a false wall that rotated to hide guests in case of inspection. Another trained its attendants to sing innocent lullabies if officials approached, to mask any sound of illegal merriment. Historians still argue whether these laws were truly about morality or more about control, keeping social order by dictating where and how people could indulge. You sip your tea quietly, aware now of the surveillance woven into the air. Even here, where warmth is supposed to bloom, there's a cold undertone. But you notice something else, too. A resistance. A quiet refusal to be erased. The walls may be bare, but the eyes of the guests still sparkle with stories. They speak without speaking, and that might be the boldest act of all. The next house looks almost identical to the last. Same bamboo fencing, same lantern style, same caretaker nod from the Okami. But inside, everything is different. You're seated next to a man in a deep blue kimono, his sleeves drawn close. His reading, not a scroll, but a printed book, woodblock, clearly. You catch the title upside down, Guide to the Licensed Quarter. He closes it slowly, meeting your eyes. Then he grins. The city doesn't sleep. It simply changes its shape. You find yourself walking down a different kind of street now. Broader, straighter, almost defiant in its refusal to curve. Gas lamps flicker where once there were paper lanterns. You hear the faint squeak of a bicycle wheel, the click of Western-style shoes against stone. And somewhere far off, a phonograph winds through static, struggling to sing. You're not sure if you're still in Edo, because maybe you're not. The year is 1871. Edo is now Tokyo. The shogun is gone. The emperor is watching. The air smells like coal dust and varnish. And the tea house you're approaching doesn't quite know what it is anymore. The sign above the entrance still bears the old family name, hand-painted and weather-worn. But below it, added recently, you see English lettering. Wobbly, uncertain, trying to learn the shape of new power. Cafe Moonmist. Yes, cafe. You step inside and it takes a moment for your eyes to adjust. The space is longer, narrower. Gone are the thick wooden beams and tatami mats. The floorboards are polished. Tables, not floor cushions. Silk screens have been replaced by velvet drapes. The paper lanterns have been retired in favor of brass fixtures, bulbs flickering uncertainly with borrowed electricity. But something remains. You see it in the corners. The hesitation in the lighting. The careful way the waitress arranges your tea. Still matcha, but now served in a cup shaped like a tulip. Western form, Eastern soul. Mainstream fact. The Meiji Restoration brought sweeping changes to Japanese society. Military conscription, a modern police force, new currencies, and aggressive westernization. Many traditional tea houses were forced to adapt or disappear. Some became cafes by name but retained their old customs and spirit. The okami who greets you looks tired. Not old, but exhausted in that way only those who have weathered cultural earthquakes can be. Her kimono is dark and modernized, the sleeves shorter, the pattern subdued. She bows slightly, but not deeply. She cannot afford to bend too far these days. Would you prefer tea, she asks in careful Japanese, or coffee? You answer tea before she can finish. She smiles, not because it's the right answer, but because it's the honest one. You're seated at a small corner table, tucked behind a partition that attempts to imitate the intimacy of the old tea rooms. There's no tokonoma alcove, no scroll, but a single potted bonsai tree sits on a shelf nearby, its branches delicately twisting upward like calligraphy in slow motion. Other guests speak in low voices. A Western man with mutton chops tries to explain something to a Japanese companion using the slow, loud tones of the linguistically clueless. A young woman in a modern dress smokes a cigarette through a long holder, flicking ash into a porcelain bowl that once held wagashi sweets. And then, as if summoned by your curiosity, music begins. Not shamisen, not koto, a piano. Someone plays it hesitantly from the back of the room, the notes stumbling like a child learning to walk. But there's grace in the attempt, a sort of soft rebellion. It's a Western melody, but played with Japanese hands. A young woman in a bright lavender kimono passes your table, trailing perfume like a memory. Her eyes meet yours briefly. She smiles, and then she disappears into the back room, through a sliding door that's just barely out of place. Too delicate for this new era. You follow her with your gaze and realize something. The old tea house is still here. Not gone. Just hidden, pressed beneath layers of imported wallpaper and imperial ambition. You excuse yourself. Walk slowly toward the door. Nobody stops you. Behind that door, time unspools. The lighting changes. The air grows heavier. Tatami beneath your feet again. Real, not imitation. A scroll hangs on the wall, brushstrokes minimal and cold, a crow flying over bare branches. You hear the soft hiss of hot water, and you know, someone's preparing matcha. This is the secret tea house within the cafe. Not on the menu, not in the guidebooks. A place passed from guest to guest, whispered about over cups of sake at midnight. It doesn't take reservations. It takes remembering. Your host kneels silently. She's older, perhaps the same woman who greeted you earlier, perhaps not. The dim light makes all ages look alike. She wears gray. Her hair is streaked with silver, but pinned with perfect precision. Her hands move with the grace of someone who trained long before modernization arrived. No words are exchanged. Just tea. The bowl is older than this government. The whisk is worn smooth from decades of service. The steam rises like incense from a shrine. You breathe it in. Mainstream fact. Even during Japan's aggressive westernization, many cultural traditions survive quietly, preserved not by institutions, but by individuals. Families pass down the rituals of tea, of dress, of calligraphy and scent, in private rooms and hidden courtyards. A quirky tidbit. Some geisha houses use the sudden popularity of Western fashion as an opportunity to blend styles, pairing Victorian corsets with kimono sleeves or introducing tango music into traditional dances. They didn't lose their culture. They remixed it. Hey, in this quiet room within a room, you watch a ceremony unchanged. And yet, the silence carries weight now. It isn't serenity. It's resistance. The okami kneels across from you. She pours her own tea, not just for you, but for herself. An equal. You raise your bowls. Not a toast. A memory. Then she speaks. Only once. This world isn't ending, she says. It's hiding. And you believe her. You leave the hidden room slower than you entered. The curtain parts again. The piano is still playing. The cafe bustles. A new guest laughs too loudly. Someone spills coffee. A young man in a Western suit flirts badly with the woman who gave you that silent smile. Everything has changed. And everything hasn't. Historians still argue whether these hybrid spaces preserve culture or diluted it. Whether tea houses became ghosts or phoenixes. Whether memory is resistance. or merely a comfort. But you know, because you saw the scroll. You tasted the matcha. You watched the steam rise, same as it always has. And as you step outside into the Tokyo night, now lit by gas lamps and the growing promise of electric signs, you hear a sound behind you. The soft THMP of a paper screen sliding shut. The secret remains. And now, so do you. The wind shifts again. You feel it before you see it. A rustle through the cherry trees, long past blossom season. The scent of camellias, out of season, but still clinging to the memory of bloom. And something else, the heaviness of endings. You're standing before the Ajisaiwaye, once one of the most renowned tea houses in Yoshiwara. The signboard has cracked, the once deep indigo curtains bleached to a graying blue. You can see patches where the fabric has been repaired, sometimes carefully, sometimes desperately. But it's open, barely. The Norn sways once, as if exhaling. You step through. Inside, the world resists the future. Dim candlelight instead of gas. Tatami worn but swept clean. The scent of incense. The hush of a place that remembers too much to ever be loud again. You're greeted not by a young attendant, but by an elder Okami who moves like she used to dance. She doesn't ask for your name. She just looks at you for a long moment, measuring not your wealth or status, but your intent, and then gestures toward the inner room. No words, just trust. This is the last night of Ajisaiwaye. You can feel it in the floorboards, in the way the walls lean slightly, tired of standing against so many storms, literal and political. The last courtesan left 2 years ago. The musicians sold their shamisen to buy rice. The paper walls were never meant to last this long. And yet, tonight, there will be one more gathering. Not a party, not a farewell, a remembering. Mainstream fact. During the Bakumatsu, the end of the Tokugawa period, many traditional establishments, especially those linked to decadence, were slowly crushed under waves of new laws and social reforms. Yoshiwara's official status as a licensed pleasure quarter dissolved under Meiji pressure, though it would limp along unofficially for decades. You are led into the CH Noma, the central room once reserved for important guests. The alcove still holds a scroll, though faded with time. You squint to read it, a haiku by Bash, ink barely legible now. Nothing in the cry of cicadas suggests they know. They will soon be gone. There are 5 others already seated. None speak. One is a former geisha. You guess, by the posture alone. One wears the uniform of a disbanded Hatamoto, the last of a samurai line. One is a scholar with ink-stained fingers, trying not to weep. And one, a boy, not more than 16, who looks like he's never been inside such a place, but knows he had to come anyway. This room, this tea house, was once legendary for its midsummer gatherings. Poets, painters, and political outcasts would meet beneath its lanterns and leave hours later with ideas that could overturn entire provinces. The walls knew everything but never spoke. And tonight, they will hear one last whisper. The Okami returns, not with tea, but with a lacquered box. She opens it slowly, revealing a collection of senja fuda, tiny slips of paper with names written on them. These were once left by patrons as offerings, clout, or flotations. Some are decorated, some are plain, some names are remembered, most are not. She passes them around the circle. You take one. The paper crackles in your palm. The ink is smudged, but the name remains. Kikunome. You don't know her. You're not supposed to. She lived a century ago. She sang here once, her voice rising through the summer heat, lifting sake cups and spirits alike. One night, it said, she sang a lullaby so beautiful that an entire duel was postponed. A quirky tidbit. In the final years of Edo, tea houses like Ajisaiwaye began to hold aboro banquets, mist banquets, where everyone wore veils and gave only pseudonyms. It was part poetry game, part escape fantasy. Real names were dangerous in such changing times. Someone begins to hum. It's the former geisha. Her voice is not strong, but it's sure. She sings an old tune, slower than the original, cracked around the edges. But it's enough to make the scholar close his eyes. The boy listens with both hands on his knees, leaning forward as though catching a secret from before his time. The samurai stays at his cup. And then, quietly, the Okami speaks. There were nights, she says, when lanterns lined this room like stars, and every guest left more alive than they arrived. She pauses. And now, the stars are gone. But the room is still here. You are served tea. Not in bowls, those were sold long ago, but in cups with hairline fractures sealed in gold. Kintsugi, the art of honoring what's broken by making it more beautiful. Historians still argue whether the collapse of Edo's pleasure quarters was cultural evolution or calculated erasure. But here, in this fragile space, it feels like a funeral for memory itself. You sip your tea slowly, the bitterness sharp and grounding. The scholar pulls out a sheaf of poems. He begins reading, voice trembling. Each line lands heavy. We danced not for lovers, but for silence. Between wars. The samurai bows low, once. He takes out a cloth bundle, unfolds it. Inside, a single chrysanthemum pin, once worn by a lover he hasn't named in 30 years. He places it on the mat, not as a tribute, but as a homecoming. The boy finally speaks. My grandmother used to sing the song from before, but I never knew where it came from. The geisha looks at him. Now you do. Mainstream fact. After the Meiji Restoration, many young people were taught to distance themselves from old Japan, seen as primitive, feudal, shameful. Traditional arts like tea ceremony, flower arranging, and shamisen music nearly vanished from public life. But they survived here, in rooms like this. Quiet. Out of sight. The Okami dims the final lantern. You're left with silhouettes. Someone recites an Enka verse. Someone else hums along. Time folds inward. And then, the ceremony begins. Not the tea ceremony. Something older. More instinctive. Everyone in the room takes turns placing something in the center. The samurai's pin. The boy's family crest on a silk scrap. The scholar's favorite line. The geisha's comb, wrapped in red ribbon. Your own contribution is humble, a coin from your own time, warmed by your hand. These are offerings not to gods, but to ghosts. A wind stays through the open eaves. The Okami bows so deeply it nearly splits her in two. She says the name of every Okiya tea house that has closed in the last 10 years. 4 to 7 names. You recognize none of them, but the rhythm is hypnotic. Yamano Hana, Kitsuno Sato, Midoricho, Akabono, Tomo, Keed, Shiga, and when she finishes, nobody speaks. A bell chimes, once. That's it. The final gathering ends without applause, without farewells. Everyone stands slowly, bows, and leaves. You stay a moment longer. The Okami places a candle before the offerings. Tomorrow, she says, we clean. We burn what must not be found. And then, she doesn't finish the sentence. She doesn't need to. You step outside. The wind carries the scent of warm wax and old camellias. You walk without purpose, without direction. The city around you is changing too quickly to recognize. But in the space behind your ribs, something remains. You are there. You saw the final flicker. You carry it now. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. You're not choosing this place, he says softly. It's choosing you. This is where you learn that the floating world's freedom is mostly illusion. Mainstream fact. Most women in the tea house and pleasure industries were bound by contracts, some signed by their families when they were children. Even geisha, trained artists, were limited in their options. While some rose to fame and fortune, many more remained invisible. A quirky detail. Some high-ranking courtesans staged dramatic retirements, complete with parades and poetry readings, only to return quietly months later under new names. Your host tonight is a woman with laughter in her eyes but exhaustion in her hands. She plays the shamisen for you, not because you asked, but because she wants to feel like herself again. She sings softly, I wear the night like perfume, until someone calls me by name. Then I disappear. Historians still argue whether these women had agency or were just playing roles written by others. But tonight, you start to see how thin the line is between performance and self. You leave the tea house with a knot in your chest. Not sorrow, not quite, just the weight of knowing that even in a world built on fantasy, someone's always paying the price. It's after midnight now. The streets are quieter. Tea houses that burn brightest have dimmed. But one remains open, almost hidden, its paper windows glowing faintly blue. Inside, you find a different kind of guest. A monk, sleeves dusted with ash, eyes sharp despite his age. A retired samurai who carries his past in the limp of his right leg. A merchant's widow, draped in plum silk, sipping alone. This is the tea house of midnight deals. Mainstream fact, though forbidden officially, Edo tea houses were sometimes sites for covert meetings, arranged marriages, under-the-table business partnerships, and even information trades between domains. A quirky tidbit. Certain tea houses had floors designed to creak in specific patterns, allowing the okami to track movement without entering the room. Tonight, a deal is struck between two men over your shoulder. You pretend not to listen, but the words are clear. Silver, transport, a name repeated twice. Historians still argue whether tea houses corrupted Edo's stability or held its fractures together. You suspect both. You're served roasted tea this time, darker, bolder. You sip and watch the monk across the room silently bow to the widow. She nods, just once. Some stories don't need tea. Just trust. And then, chaos. You're barely 3 steps into your next visit when someone shouts fire. Panic unfolds with eerie grace. Staff know what to do. Paper doors fly open. Guests are ushered down back corridors. You're moved like a chess piece, fluidly, silently, urgently. Mainstream fact. Fires were the constant enemy of Edo. Whole districts burned, often. Yashura was rebuilt at least 5 times after major fires. A quirky tidbit. Tea houses used portable partitions soaked in water and kept woven sandals by exits for faster escapes. You end up outside, in a garden you hadn't seen before. The stars blink above, indifferent. Smoke rises behind you, faint but real. Historians still argue whether the frequency of fires helped create the ephemeral nature of Edo design. Everything beautiful, but temporary. The fire's controlled before it spreads. No damage here, just a memory of smoke. The tea house will open again tomorrow, and the curtain will still sway like nothing ever happened. The next house you enter is silent, but not empty. Scrolls line the walls. Stacks of paper tied in twine. Brushes resting in porcelain holders. The room smells like ink and dust and pine. This is a writer's tea house. Mainstream fact. Edo literature was shaped deeply by tea house culture. Many woodblock prints, ukiyo-zeshi, popular novels, and love poems were written in, inspired by, or printed for tea house readers. A quirky tidbit. Some authors wrote under pseudonyms that were actually the names of favorite courtesans, either to hide their identity or to flatter the woman they owed inspiration to. You're handed a brush and a single sheet. You hesitate, then write. Tonight I borrowed a shadow. Ward is my name, and returned it by dawn. Historians still argue whether these literary tea houses were havens for art or just romanticized lounges for bored dilettantes. You dip your brush again, just once. Then leave your name unsigned. The night feels thinner now. The breeze cooler. You arrive at a house with shutters half closed. The door creaks. The okami is younger than the others, but her eyes are already tired. The Meiji Restoration has begun. Edo is ending. Mainstream fact. After 1868, many traditional tea houses were closed or repurposed under modernization laws. Geisha culture was regulated. Pleasure quarters lost protection. A quirky tidbit. Some okami turned their tea houses into Western-style cafes, offering coffee and gramophones to stay afloat. You sit in a room that smells like endings. The music here is recorded. The walls are bare, but there's still tea, still silence, still someone willing to perform the ritual. Historians still argue whether this was decline or adaptation. You sit quietly and sip, because either way, you're still here. The last tea house stands on a quiet lane. It's not famous, not open often. Its wood is faded, its curtain torn. But someone lights a candle in the window when they know a guest is coming. Tonight, that candle is for you. Inside, dust coats the tatami. A single cup waits. You sit. You breathe. Mainstream fact. A few Edura tea houses still exist today, preserved as museums, family homes, or private retreats. They are the last echoes of a world built on performance and poise. A quirky tidbit: one ancient tea house in Kanazawa still prepares tea in silence, refusing modern conveniences, and takes no photos. Historians still argue whether these places are relics or living spirits. But you know the truth. They live in memory. You sip the last cup. The walls creak like sighs. And the night, at last, begins to fade. The lanterns flicker once more as the city folds itself back into shadow. Your feet ache gently, but not unpleasantly. You've wandered long enough. The stone paths now blur beneath your steps. The curtain stops swaying. The scent of tea lingers, warm and soft, like breath against your neck. Everything slows. You remember the rustle of a kimono, the chill of midnight ink on your fingers, the way steam curled in a room so quiet you heard your own thoughts rearrange. Maybe you didn't survive the etiquette. Maybe you misstepped. But still, you were there. And now, part of you always will be. You return to the door where the journey began. The Norn curtain lifts in the breeze one last time. You don't enter. You don't have to. You already carry the floating world within you. Now rest. The walls are quiet. The stories are sleeping. And so should you. End of script. Sweet dreams.